Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
This audio presentation contains graphic details of death, violence, and controversial subject matter. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
From Dead Souls Media, this is Dunblane. I'm Jamie Black, a researcher and psychologist, and I'll be your host for tonight.
News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
The class that died, massacred by a crazed gunman. Parents in anguish as the grim news spread. Tonight, a traumatized community is changed forever. Good evening. In 3 appalling minutes today, in the small city of Dunblane in central Scotland, 16 children were murdered. A former scout leader with a grudge walked into their primary school gymnasium with 4 handguns and, without warning, opened fire. The children who died were all 5- and 6-year-olds. Their teacher, Gwen Mayer, seen here with her class in the autumn, was also killed. Almost all the children in the picture who weren't killed were wounded, some seriously. The killer, Thomas Hamilton, finally shot himself dead. He was known to the authorities as an unstable loner, and schools had been warned not to let him onto their premises.
James Jackson wrote in Time magazine on March 25th, 1996, quote,
"For those who stood, bewildered, on the streets of Dunblane that terrible day, the sight of the anguished woman is one they can never forget, a defining vision of the Scottish town's moment of horror. Victoria!" she cried, as a convoy of ambulances sped past, sirens screaming and lights flashing. "Victoria!"
That was one of the children's names, Victoria. Others, read out in a mournful voice by Police Chief Superintendent Lewis Munn, were as familiar and as evocative of middle-class Scottish family life. Emma, Melissa, Megan, Charlotte, Kevin, Ross, Hannah, David, Mahiri, Brett, Abigail, Emily, Sophie, John, and Joanna. Ordinary, yet pretty names. The names on teachers' attendance lists, on captions of school pictures, on programs for school plays, and on lineups for school's sports days. And yet, they are the names of the dead at Dunblane's little primary school gymnasium, where a man with a pocket full of pistols and a mind filled with hatred massacred those children. In total, 16 5- and 6-year-old children, just babies, and their teacher died that cold grey Wednesday when a failed youth leader named Thomas Hamilton, age 43, barged into the school and emptied the bullet chambers of 4 handguns into them as they screamed and cowered in the gymnasium hall. 2 other teachers and 12 further children were wounded, 3 critically, before Hamilton put one of the guns to his head and blew part of it away. Somber words to describe the horrifying scenes which unfolded in the small Scottish town. Dunblane, a picturesque and serene little town in the county of Perthshire, just 6 miles from the 1,000-year-old historic city of Stirling in central Scotland. Dunblane, eternally associated not with a name of quiet British country living, but forever marred with the association to a school shooting. The United Kingdom's only school shooting. The Dunblane Massacre. The murders, the slaughter of innocent children and their teacher, took place at Dunblane Primary School on the 13th of March 1996, 30 years ago this week. Dunblane is a town home to just 9,000 people. The town's name is derived from Old Scots, meaning the fort of Saint Blaine, a Christian saint who lived in the 6th century. Saint Blaine is most well known for the resurrection of a child, a young boy brought back to life to his heartbroken parents. If only Saint Blaine was there on that day in March of 1996. One of the darkest in Scotland's recent history, when 43-year-old Thomas Hamilton killed 16 pupils and one teacher, further injuring 15 others, before turning his gun on himself, committing suicide at the scene of the crime. To this day, it remains the deadliest mass shooting in British history, the only school shooting in British history. It only took one for Great Britain to say enough is enough. Guns carry no use in a peaceful society, and they abolished them to history forever. Following the murders, the public debate on gun control laws was the number one topic and concern throughout the country, and included public petitions signed in the hundreds of thousands to enact a ban on private ownership of handguns. It led to the 1996 Cullen Report and the grassroots Snowdrop movement. 2 new firearms acts subsequently prohibited the private ownership of handguns in Great Britain, and the UK government instituted a buyback programme which purchased the handguns which were in public circulation back from private citizens and destroyed them. Tonight's episode is a sombre and sobering one, a dark anniversary event that many would perhaps choose to forget, but for the importance of history never repeating itself, should never be forgotten. Listener caution is strongly advised. At around 8:15 a.m. on Wednesday, March the 13th, 1996, witnesses saw 43-year-old Thomas Hamilton scraping ice off of his white Ford Transit van outside his home at number 7 Kent Road in Stirling, a drab council house on a quiet estate road near the Brayhead Park. That morning, Hamilton had a brief and friendly conversation with the eyewitness, a neighbour of his for more than 5 years. Then, shortly after the van had warmed up, Hamilton soon left, driving the roughly 5.5 miles, or 8 kilometres, to a location in North Dunblane town. Hamilton arrived at Dunblane Primary School on Doon Road, his intended destination, at around 9:30 a.m. The school day had already started for the 640 children who attended the primary school. Hamilton parked his van near a telegraph pole in a quiet spot in the lower school car park. Hamilton, using a pair of diagonal wire cutters he took out of a tool rack which he brought with him, immediately cut the telephone cables at the bottom of the telegraph pole, which served a small street of houses next to the school, but not the school itself. Hamilton effectively cut off communication from the buildings in the neighbourhood around the school, though the school's comms remained active. Following this small infraction, Hamilton made his way across the car park towards the main school building. He was carrying 4 handguns, ammunition, and some other small equipment. He was headed directly towards the northwest side of the school. He knew where he was going, to a door near the toilets and the school gymnasium. Had he used the main entrance to the school, it was more likely that he would have been seen, as there were many persons in the vicinity of the entrance at that time. After entering, he made his way to the gymnasium hall armed with his 4 legally held handguns, 2 9mm Browning HP pistols, and 2 Smith & Wesson M119 .357 Magnum revolvers. Hamilton was also carrying 743 pieces of ammunition, 501 9mm cartridges, and 242 .357 Magnum cartridges. On the 13th of March, all primary years 1, 2 and 3 classes had attended assembly from 9:10 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. They consisted of a total of about 250 pupils, together with their teachers and the school chaplain. The assembly hall was not large enough to accommodate the whole school at one time. With that consequence, the assemblies were limited to certain year groups in rotation. Primary class 113 which was a class of 28 pupils, along with their teacher, Mrs. Gwen Mayer, had already changed into their gym clothes before attending assembly. PE, or gym class, was their first lesson of the day after the morning assembly. 25 members of the class were 5 years of age, and 3 were 6 years of age. Mrs. Mayer was 47 years of age. The PE lesson was in the presence of 3 adult members of staff, the aforementioned Mrs. Mayer, PE teacher Eileen Harold, and teaching assistant Mary Blake. Before entering the gymnasium hall, Hamilton fired 2 shots, one into the stage of the assembly hall and the other into the girls' toilet. In the gym, Mrs. Mayer was talking to Mrs. Harold prior to the start of the lesson. The children were sat in a circle in the centre of the gymnasium hall. Thomas Hamilton entered the school gym. The sound of him opening the doors echoed, causing Mrs. Mayer to turn around as she was not expecting an interruption. Hamilton was wearing a dark jacket, black corduroy trousers, and a woolly hat with ear defenders. He had a pistol in his right hand. He took a few steps into the gym, and without hesitation he immediately started shooting rapidly and randomly towards all those gathered in the centre of the hall. Mrs. Harold was hit first in both forearms, the right hand, and left breast, as she raised her arms trying to protect herself. She stumbled forward into the open-plan equipment storage area, which adjoined the gym. She was followed by a number of the children, who had also been shot. Mrs. Mayer was also shot several times and died instantly. Mrs. Blake was then shot in the head and both legs, but managed to reach the storage area, ushering some children in ahead of her. From his position near the entrance doorway of the gym, Hamilton had initially fired a total of 29 shots in rapid succession. In less than 2 minutes, he had killed 1 child and injured several others. He had killed Mrs. Mayer and seriously injured 2 other teachers. During this initial shooting, 4 injured children made their way to the storage area where Mrs. Blake and Mrs. Harold tried desperately to console and calm the terrified children who had taken refuge there. The children cowered on the floor, lying helplessly in pools of blood, having to hear the screams and moans of their classmates out in the gym hall and waiting for the ordeal to end or for help to come. Hamilton then moved up the east side of the gym hall, firing 6 shots as he walked, and then fired a further 8 shots towards the opposite end of the gym. He then advanced into the middle of the gym hall and walked in a semicircle, systematically firing 16 gunshots at a group of children who had either been disabled by the initial firing or who had been thrown to the floor. Hamilton stood over them and fired at point-blank range, executing the children. A child from Primary 7 class who had been sent on an errand by his teacher and was walking along the west side of the gym, heard loud banging and screaming coming from inside the gymnasium hall. Curiously, he looked in through a window and saw Hamilton shooting. Hamilton saw him looking in and shot at him. The child was struck by flying glass and ran off. It appears that Hamilton then advanced to the south end of the gym hall where he fired 24 rounds in various directions. He shot through the window adjacent to the fire escape door at the southeast end of the gym. This may have been at an adult who was walking across the playground. Hamilton then opened the fire escape door and fired a further 4 shots in the same direction from within the gym. He then went briefly outside of the fire escape doorway and fired 4 more shots towards the library cloakroom, striking Mrs. Grace Tweddle, a member of staff, with a shot to the head. Another teacher, Mrs. Catherine Gordon, and her young class, who were located in an exterior classroom building, the classroom closest to the fire escape door, all saw and heard Hamilton firing from that direction. Mrs. Gordon told her class to get down onto the floor before he fired 9 bullets into their classroom, striking books and equipment. 1 bullet passed through a chair where a child had been sitting just seconds before. Hamilton then re-entered the gym, dropped the Browning pistol he had been using and took out one of the 2 Magnum revolvers. He put the barrel of the gun into his mouth, pointed it upwards, and pulled the trigger, killing himself instantly. Mrs. Mayer and 15 children lay dead in the gym, and 1 further child was close to death. They had sustained a total of 58 gunshot wounds. 26 of these wounds were of such a nature that individually they would have proved fatal. 15 more children lay wounded. A total of 32 people sustained gunshot wounds inflicted by Hamilton over a 3 to 4 minute period, 16 of whom were fatally wounded in the gymnasium. Mahairi Isabel Macbeth, aged 5, survived the initial shooting, but was found to be dead on arrival at Stirling Royal Infirmary at 10:30 a.m. The first call to the police was made at 9:41 a.m. by the headmaster of the school, Ronald Taylor, who had been alerted by assistant headmistress Agnes Owlson to the possibility of a gunman on the school premises. The shooting started roughly between 9:35 and 9:40 a.m. and lasted no more than 4 minutes. Owlson had told Taylor that she had heard screaming inside the gymnasium and had seen what she thought to be bullet cartridges on the ground. Taylor had been aware of some loud noises, but first of all he just assumed that the sounds were coming from builders on site that he had not been informed of. As he was on his way to the gymnasium, the shooting ended, and when he saw what had happened, he ran back to his office and told Deputy Headmistress Fiona Edington to call for ambulances, a call which was made at 9:43 a.m. The first ambulance arrived on the scene at 9:57 a.m. in response to the 9:43 call. Another medical team from Dunblane Health Centre arrived at 10:04 a.m, which included doctors and a nurse who were involved in the initial resuscitation of the injured. Medical teams from the health centres at Doon and Callander arrived shortly after. The Accident and Emergency Department at Stirling Royal Infirmary had also been informed of a major incident involving multiple casualties at 9:48 a.m, and the first of several medical teams from the hospital arrived at 10:15 a.m. Another medical team from the Falkirk and District Royal Infirmary arrived at 10:35 a.m. The survivors of the incident were all taken to Stirling Royal Infirmary. By about 11:10 a.m, all of the injured had been transported to hospital for emergency medical treatment. Following further examination, several of the injured children were deemed as requiring specialist care for their injuries and were subsequently transferred to the District Royal Infirmary in Falkirk and others to the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Glasgow. Thomas Hamilton had fired 106 shots in total during the massacre, including his final suicide shot. 105 were fired by one of his Browning pistols, and the one final shot was fired with his Smith & Wesson revolver. Hamilton had brought 25 20-round 9mm magazines with him to the school that morning. 4 had been completely emptied, and 3 partially emptied. News of the senseless attack quickly spread throughout the small town, across Scotland, across the United Kingdom, and around the globe. Parents came running in their dozens to the school gate. The horror of what was emerging left each of them devastated, in throes of grief, anguish, and deep distress. Their cries and screams would echo through the town from the gates of the school. The first police officers arrived from Dunblane Police Station at about 9:50 a.m. This was in response to the telephone call from Mr. Taylor, the headmaster. The police immediately summoned further police assistance, and these officers assisted in the gym hall and took steps to clear the way for the arrival of ambulances and medical crews. By about 10:10 a.m, senior police officers were on the scene, including the Chief Constable, who had put into force the major incident strategy. In accordance with this, a casualty bureau was set up at police headquarters in Stirling. The Chief Constable also delegated various tasks to his commanders. DCI John Ogg was appointed to be Senior Investigating Officer. On March 13th, over 100 police officers out of a total force of 658 were involved in the incident. Police placed a cordon around the school buildings and locked the school down with an outer cordon around the road access into the school. By 10:30 a.m., a considerable number of people had approached the school, not merely anxious relatives of school children, but also representatives of the media. The emergency services had to make their way through some 300 plus people to get to the school gates. The police gave priority to ensuring that the injured were taken to hospital first. A decision was taken to refrain from noting their names before they left in order to ensure that they were given medical attention as soon as possible and in order to avoid insensitive intrusion. The next objective was to identify the deceased, then institute inquiries, followed by the appointment of production officers and the setting up of an administrative system. It was quickly found that 2 members of Mrs. Mayer's class were absent from school that day. At one point, it appeared that a particular child had been apparently identified as being at Stirling Royal Infirmary as well as laying dead in the gym hall. In order to determine the identity of the dead, it was necessary for the police to obtain identification of the survivors, who had been removed to hospital. However, the police initially had difficulty in communicating with the hospital. Apart from a line in the library which was used for the internet facility, there was only one other telephone line into the school. This was engaged for virtually the whole morning by calls from anxious parents or from the media. When the police used mobile telephones, they soon found that they also became completely blocked. They decided not to resort to their radio system as the information in which they were interested was extremely sensitive and could have been picked up by scanners by the public and media. The police did not receive information from the hospital until after midday, when they obtained 2 or 3 names at a time with the use of mobile telephones. They requested British Telecom install additional telephone lines into the school, but it was not until 3 p.m. that the first of these lines were installed. Progress to resolution was initially very slow. Arrangements had to be made by the police for the relatives of children who attended the school. They were taken to a private house. From there, the parents of children in primary 113 were escorted to a second house before being transferred to a staff room at the school. The process of reuniting parents with their children in other classes took some 2 to 3 hours. The police began to inform the parents of children who were injured and arranged for them to be driven to hospitals. By around 1:15 to 1:30 p.m., all of the injured children had been identified and the necessary information had been conveyed to their parents. A family liaison team consisting of 2 police officers and a social worker was established early on in order to communicate information to the parents of the deceased children. This team were assembled and briefed before they spoke to each of the families, and they were also instructed to provide them with continuing counsel and support. The police took the deliberate decision to withhold information to the press and public about any of the deceased until all of them had been identified and their families informed. The massacre was unprecedented in British culture and history. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Why had the gunman done this? What led to this macabre and monstrous act? Today, 30 years later, the 16 children killed that morning would all be adults in their 30s. Their teacher, Gwen Mayer, would be in her 70s. Dunblane remains the tragedy that haunts Scotland to this very day.
The school lights burn bright tonight. The police haven't finished their work, but they too join with the rest of Dunblane in feeling dazed and numb. After the sound of gunfire, confusion and bewilderment, and the anxiety of waiting for news. A stricken crowd of parents waiting in dread to be told who lived and who died. Relief for some. Others had to wait. And the constant quest for answers, for any information. But for a while there were no answers, just shock. The ambulances were still leaving, driving to hospital, going past parents who'd just heard, mothers and fathers running towards school. For some, there was to be good news, but not for the parents of 16 youngsters. And the waiting went on, the community verging on the edge of despair. There were precious moments of indescribable relief for those who found their children safe, frightened, but alive. These are the ones tonight who may give thanks. Evil touched them, but just brushed past. It was in this building, close to the school, that the answers for some finally came. Fears exploded into reality. The utter heartbreak of Dunblane exposed.
Thomas Watt was born Thomas Watt Jr. on May the 10th, 1952 in Glasgow, Scotland. His father, Thomas Watt Sr., was a bus driver, and his mother, Agnes Graham Hamilton, was a hotel chambermaid. The family was working class and from very modest means. When Thomas Jr. was just 18 months old, his father abandoned the family and took up residence with another woman. This led to his mother and father getting divorced shortly after. From the age of 2 years old, Thomas Jr. and his father had no contact with one another whatsoever. Thomas Jr.'s maternal grandparents were James and Catherine Hamilton. They supported their daughter Agnes and gave her and her son a place to live. They also raised Thomas Jr. as their own son. When Thomas Jr. was 4 years old, his grandparents legally adopted him as their son and changed his surname to Thomas Hamilton. The family relocated to Stirling in central Scotland when Thomas was a young boy. Stirling, a city on the River Forth, is located 26 miles, or 42 kilometres, northeast of Glasgow, and 37 miles, or 60 kilometres, northwest of Edinburgh. Thomas was made to believe that his maternal grandparents were actually his actual birth parents, and that his mother was actually his older sister. The press, I seem to recall, seemed to fixate on this small fact in the mid-90s, and much was reported about the seemingly strange behaviour that this was, and the subsequent psychological impact it may have had on young Thomas. Thomas wasn't told the truth by his grandparents until he was around 22 years old. Whether the impact of this caused a deep psychological break in Thomas is up for interpretation. Nevertheless, the trauma and betrayal that Thomas felt at receiving this news was undeniable. Thomas felt lied to by one of the small group of people whom he had trusted all of his life. It certainly triggered attachment issues in Thomas and a deep resentment towards familial relationships. In his early 20s, Thomas also began working in a number of youth organisations. He became the head of several youth clubs in and around the Stirling area. Hamilton would become the subject of several complaints to police over the years regarding inappropriate behaviour towards young boys, including claims that he had taken photographs of semi-naked boys without parental consent. Back during this time period, it was not common practice for youth workers to undergo criminal background checks, as is the practice today. So Hamilton and his proclivities flew under the radar for quite some time. In July of 1973, at age 21, Hamilton had become an assistant Boy Scout leader with the 4th and 6th Stirling Troop of the Boy Scout Association. But he very quickly came under suspicion because of his inappropriate behaviour towards young boys in his care. At the age of 22, he was also seconded as leader to the 24th Stirlingshire Troop at Bannockburn as Boy Scout leader. Complaints quickly emerged about his behaviour there too. 2 particular complaints were made about his leadership early on during his tenure as leader, the most serious of which were concerned with 2 separate occasions when the boys who were in his care were forced to sleep overnight in his company in a van during very cold weather at Aviemore. His excuse on the first occasion was that the intended accommodation had been double booked, and he was warned of the need to double-check such arrangements in the future. On the second occasion, and where he tried to use the same excuse again, it was found that no booking had been made by him on either of these occasions. Thomas Hamilton was subsequently asked to resign as Boy Scout leader. It's worth noting that at the time Hamilton was asked to leave the leadership role in the Boy Scouts, the County Boy Scout Commissioner, Brian Fairgrieve, who met with Hamilton to ask him to withdraw his services, documented at the time that he did not think that Thomas Hamilton was a particularly stable person. Fairgrieve commented in official association documentation that, quote,
I formed the impression that he had a persecution complex, that he had delusions of grandeur, and I felt his actions were almost paranoia.
Fairgrieve was extremely doubtful about Hamilton's moral intention towards young boys. On the 13th of May 1974, Hamilton was removed as Boy Scout leader. Around a year later, he attempted to become a Boy Scout leader in the nearby county of Clackmannanshire, where he found that his previous actions had led to him being added to the Boy Scout-wide blacklist, preventing him from working with Boy Scouts again. In less than 12 months, a number of complaints were received about Thomas Hamilton, which included him forcing young Boy Scouts to sleep next to him in his tent or van during outdoor pursuits. He was also accused of photographing the young boys whilst they were getting changed and making suggestive and lewd comments to the young boys within his care. In February 1977, Hamilton requested the Scout Association hold a committee of inquiry into a complaint he made alleging that he had been victimised. This request was denied. In April 1977, he wrote a further letter to the Scouting Association where he was quoted as saying, I do not want my good name to be part of this so-called organisation in this district. His letters of complaint continued over the years. In 1978, he approached Mr. David Vass, the District Commissioner for the Trossachs District of Scotland, offering his services as a Scout leader there. After consulting with Mr. Fairgrieve in Stirlingshire, Mr. Vass responded that they were unable to make use of his services. Hamilton was once again furious and persistently maintained that the Scouts had not only ruined his reputation, but they were linked with the actions taken by other organisations, in particular the Scottish Police. In lieu of Hamilton being blacklisted from the Boy Scouts Association, he instead became involved in the setting up and running of his own boys' clubs. Between 1981 and 1996, Hamilton, sometime alone and sometimes with others, organised and ran 15 different boys' clubs in the central Scotland area. 14 out of the 15 clubs were permitted to use local authority school premises in Central, Lothian, Fife and Strathclyde regions to conduct their activities, all seemingly unchecked or monitored. The typical way in which Thomas Hamilton sought to obtain support for his clubs was to send leaflets to local houses and primary schools in the area which the club was intended to serve. The clubs were aimed at boys between the ages of 7 and 11 years of age. The club activities consisted of games such as football, along with an element of gymnastics. Hamilton held a Grade 5 certificate from the British Amateur Gymnastics Association, which qualified him to provide coaching in gymnastics, subject to being supervised by someone who held a higher qualification. This meant that he was occasionally assisted by persons with sporting qualifications who had responded to advertisements that Hamilton posted in local newspapers, or by volunteer helpers, including some parents, but this was rare and was not regularly the case. For the most part, Hamilton ran each of the clubs entirely on his own. From about 1989, he used the title Boys Club Sports Group Committee, thus creating the impression that others were participating in the running of the clubs. But in reality, this was a title for his own activities, and own activities alone. A purposeful deception. From the running of the clubs he obtained a modest income, which in the early days enabled him to finance his trading in cameras. Boys were initially charged 20 pence per night, but these charges rose to £1 or £1.50 towards the late 80s. Most of the clubs were initially extremely popular, attracting as many as 70 boys per night. However, over the lifetime of a club the numbers would routinely drop, typically to less than a dozen. In the early days, Hamilton put this down to lack of patience or determination on the part of the boys. However, it is more likely that this was due to the reactions from the boys to his behaviours and the rumours about his character. Thomas Hamilton's explanation of the objectives he had for his clubs was that he wanted to give the boys something to do and keep them off the streets, and that the discipline that he would provide was a useful preparation for the boys in later life. He said that he put his boys through fitness schemes, that he hated fat children and blamed parents for allowing them to eat junk food. However, his style of running the clubs attracted the comments from parents and helpers that it was over-regimented and even militaristic. Witnesses described him as tending to be domineering. There was too much use of shouting. It suggested to some that he was getting something out of dominating the boys. His approach was in any event not in line with modern methods. The evidence also indicated that the exercises which the boys were asked to perform were overstrenuous for their age range. Parents were also concerned that he was running the clubs without any apparent adult help. He said that he was authorized to be in sole charge of up to 30 boys, but this was widely known to be untrue. Whilst running the boys' clubs, Hamilton regularly appeared to show an unusual interest in individual boys. Some he would coerce to put pressure to obtain parental permission to attend one of his, quote, summer camps. It was clear to all who attended his boys' clubs that he had favourites. He was also eager to collect boys from their homes and was keen to find out more about their family backgrounds than was acceptable to their parents. Parents were particularly concerned about Hamilton's insistence that for gymnastics the boys wore black and ill-fitting swimsuit trunks, which he provided, and that they changed into them in the gym rather than in changing rooms. Hamilton argued that the boys often arrived in unsuitable clothing, and hence his provided uniform was needed. A significant matter which was of concern to parents whose children attended Hamilton's clubs was his practice of taking photographs and videos of the boys posing in their black swimming trunks without the knowledge or permission of their parents. He argued that it was quite normal for photographs to be taken for training and advertising purposes, and said that parents could obtain copies from him. The parents' overriding impression was that there was something unnatural to the photos and videos that Hamilton was taking. The boys did not seem to be enjoying themselves, but appeared silent and even frightened. When confronted with complaints about this, Hamilton argued that it was necessary to identify what muscles were being used by the boys during their exercises, so that wrong movements could be corrected. When challenged about videotapes being made and photographs taken without parental knowledge or consent, he simply responded that parental consent was not necessary. Individual parents, through contact with each other, discovered that their anxieties were shared. At home, Hamilton kept a large collection of photographs of the boys, many of them wearing very tight black swimming trunks. These were in albums or attached to the walls of his home. On one occasion, he attempted, without success, to interest a neighbour in a videotape showing his boys performing gymnastics in small black swimming trunks. But the video made the neighbour feel uneasy. On one occasion, Hamilton also attempted, without success, to take photographs of a neighbour's children, including his 5-year-old son. Thomas Hamilton's clubs typically lasted around a year to 18 months before numbers dwindled, and he would set up a new club in a new area. Hamilton claimed that local rumours regarding his behaviour towards young boys had led to the failure of his business in 1993, and that, in the last months of his life, he had complained that his attempts to organise a new boys' club was subjected to persecution by local police and the Boy Scout movement. Between 1981 and 1996, Thomas Hamilton operated 15 boys' clubs and 9 summer camps. Over those years, he received more than 28 complaints from parents in regards to his behaviours and activities during these clubs. Hamilton was investigated by Scottish police 6 times over the course of 20 years. Interesting fact, one of the pupils at Dunblane Primary School the day of the massacre and a former attendee of one of Thomas Hamilton's boys' clubs was international tennis superstar Andy Murray. Murray, who was 8 years old on the day of the attack, and his elder brother Jamie, then 10, were on their way to the school gymnasium when the shooting occurred, and they survived by hiding under a desk in the headmaster's office. Murray, who was raised in Dunblane, had previously attended a boys' club run by Hamilton. In 2008, he described how his mother sometimes gave Hamilton lifts in her car. In Murray's autobiography, published in 2014, he stated, quote,
"The weirdest thing was that we knew the guy. He had been in my mum's car. It's obviously weird to think you had a murderer in your car sitting next to your mum. That is probably another reason why I don't want to look back at it. It is just so uncomfortable to think that it was someone we knew from the boys' club. Then to find out he's a murderer was something my brain couldn't cope with. I could have been one of those children."
For the record here, this quote by Andy Murray is voiced by an actor. A motive for the massacre was never established, but the many people who had encountered Hamilton over the years drew a picture of a man who was obsessed with small boys and embittered by rejection. For 13 years from 1972, Hamilton ran a shop on 49 Cowain Street in Dunblane. The shop was called, quote, Woodcraft, and specialised in DIY goods and supplies. When this closed in 1985, he claimed unemployment benefit until 1993. From this date until his death, he bought and sold cameras and camera equipment. Hamilton stated on a number of occasions over the years that his shop and camera business failed due to false and vicious rumours that were spread about him by locals. His nickname in the town was, quote, Mr. Creepy. On February the 14th, 1977, Hamilton was granted a firearm licence in the UK, and this was renewed a further 5 times until his death in 1996. On the 19th of March, 1996, 6 days after the massacre, Hamilton's body was cremated. According to a police spokesman, this service was conducted, quote, far away from Dunblane. 2 days after the shooting, a vigil and prayer session was held at Dunblane Cathedral, which was attended by people of all faiths. On March 17th, Mother's Day, Queen Elizabeth and her daughter Anne, the Princess Royal, attended a memorial service at Dunblane Cathedral. In October 1996, some 7 months after the massacre, the families of the victims organised their own memorial service at Dunblane Cathedral. More than 600 people attended, including the then Prince Charles. The service was broadcast live on national television and conducted by James White, a former moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Television presenter Lorraine Kelly, who had befriended some of the victims' families whilst reporting on the massacre for GMTV, was invited to speak at the service. The gymnasium hall at Dunblane Primary School was demolished on April the 11th, 1996, a month after the massacre. It was replaced by a memorial garden. 2 years after the massacre, on March 14th, 1998, another memorial garden was opened at Dunblane Cemetery, where Gwen Mayer and 12 of the children who were killed are buried. Between 1996 and 1997, the Snowdrop Campaign, a grassroots movement in Great Britain, was launched by bereaved families after the Dunblane massacre. Hundreds of thousands of people demanded that private handgun ownership be banned in their entirety. The Snowdrop Campaign collated a petition for the government and collected over 700,000 signatures, putting pressure on the government to pass strict legislation and end legal handgun ownership in the United Kingdom. The name Snowdrop was chosen because a snowdrop blooms in March, the month of the shooting. In response to the massacre and widespread public outcry, the Conservative government of Prime Minister John Major introduced the Firearms Amendment Act 1997, which banned all cartridge ammunition handguns with the exception of a .22 caliber rimfire in England, Scotland and Wales. Following the 1997 United Kingdom general election, the Labour government of Prime Minister Tony Blair introduced the Firearms Amendment No. 2 Act 1997, banning the remaining .22 cartridge handguns as well. This left only certain sporting handguns as being legal. Following the success of the campaign and the change in law, the public voluntarily surrendered over 160,000 handguns through a government compensation scheme. It was the people of the United Kingdom who wanted guns removed and banned, not something a strict government imposed. The people never again wanted to endure another mass shooting like that had occurred at Dunblane. In 2025, King Charles awarded Gwen Mayer with the Elizabeth Emblem Award. The emblem is awarded by the monarch to the next of kin of public servants killed while performing their duties. Those who sadly died in the massacre, the innocent victims of the monster, are Victoria Clydesdale, aged 5, whose mother Lynn had wanted her to stay at home that day because she had a rash, but Victoria was determined to go to school because it was gym day. Emma Crozier, aged 5, described by neighbours as lively, charming and bright. Her father John and siblings Jack and Ellie went on to campaign for greater gun control. Melissa Curie, aged 5, whose family lived in a bungalow close to the school. Melissa loved going to school and seeing her friends. Charlotte Dunn, aged 5. Her family had moved to Dunblane only a few months before the massacre. Teachers at her previous school, the Cradley Church of England Primary School in the West Midlands, described her as a lovely, bright, bubbly girl who was full of promise. Kevin Hassel, aged 5, whose elder sister had also attended the school. He was described by neighbours as a lovely wee thing, a typical boy. Ross Irvine, aged 5, was the last of the Dunblane children to be laid to rest at a private funeral service. David Kerr, aged 5, whose family left his favourite cuddly toy beside his body after saying their last farewells at the hospital in Stirling. Mahiri Macbeth, aged 5, whose father Murray had died in October a few months before the massacre. Mahiri's funeral service included an extract from one of her favourite bedtime stories, which her father used to read to her. Brett McKinnon, aged 6, who lived in the same street as Joanna Ross. His funeral service included an A.A. Milne poem, which ended with the line, "But now I'm 6. I'm as clever, so I think I'll be 6 now and forever and ever." Abigail McLennan, aged 5, described by neighbours as a wonderfully dainty little girl. Abigail had 2 elder sisters who she was very close with. Emily Morton, aged 5. Her mother Catherine was on duty at Stirling Royal Infirmary as a cytologist when news of the massacre broke. Her husband Leslie rushed to the hospital and together they went to the school. Sophie Lockwood North, aged 5, an only child whose mother Barbara died of cancer at the age of 31 in 1993. Her father Mick has gone on to become a prominent anti-gun campaigner. Paying tribute to his daughter in March 1996, he described his daughter as the most precious gift I ever had, and such a lovely, very special little girl. John Petrie, aged 5, described as a lovely wee boy with a cheeky face. Joanna Ross, aged 5, a close friend of Emma Crozier. A joint funeral service was held for them both, where they were remembered as wee angels. Hannah Scott, aged 5, remembered as a happy and chirpy youngster who was a popular playmate. Megan Turner, aged 5. Her mother Karen said, "Every parent of every child will say theirs was special, but Megan was so special to us. She was so full of life, always jumping and running. She stood on her head more than on her feet. She was simply wonderful." Gwen Mayer, aged 45, the children's teacher. Speaking in 2025, her husband, Rodney Mayer, said, "You would have to have known Gwen, to know that she would have done whatever trying to protect the children in her care that day. She paid the ultimate price for that commitment. We feel that she has been honoured for what happened on that dark day." Good night, everyone.